All right, good to go.
Finding my agenda.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call the North Bend City Council work session to order for Monday, January 25th at 4 p.m. The first item of discussion on our agenda is we actually have two discussions today. We have A is about the North Bend Municipal Pool, and B will be the North Bend Police Department dispatch. So we're going to go ahead and begin with the pool discussion. And I know there are some presentations today. And it's just a reminder to the council, make sure we talk into our microphones, myself as well. Really.
All right, Jamie, front and center.
Good afternoon, council members, Madam Mayor. We had in the past few weeks tasked out with coming up with some options for the North Bend pool. We have a couple different things for you to look at today, and I'll get started talking a little bit about the pool. Some of you were here almost 2 years ago now, when I came to you to ask what direction you'd like us to go in and what steps you wanted us to take to go forward. So when I came to you, we were open approximately 100 hours per week during the school year and 125 hours a week during the summer. We closed 2 to 4 weeks in the autumn for annual maintenance so that we can take care of our building and preserve that as long as possible. So we're usually open about 4,900 hours a year. Okay. Pool closed March 16th of 2020 due to COVID restrictions. We have not reopened. Part of the plan when we first closed was to wait until that phase 3 because of the demographics and the user groups that use our facility, and not doing the open, closed, open, closed, open, closed, open, closed, open, closed. So we have a 22,000 square foot building. It is one of the largest enclosed pools. It is the only public enclosed pool from Newport down the coast. We serve as a training center for Southwest Aquatic Team, North Bend High School, Southwestern Oregon Community College swim team, U.S. Coast Guard, helicopter rescue swimmers, as well as other community groups that came and used the pool on top of our population. So first, I'm going to bring up the map, and David can talk a little bit about how this was put together. Coast Guard, helicopter rescue swimmers. Doesn't like it when I put on again.
All right, so the fact is, I think we can get there faster.
All right, everybody's got a Zoom in.
All right, so one of the things that the council asked was where are our pool users and can we see them visually? So we have mapped out all of these pool users, and interesting enough, we have some very specific data on where they all come from. But I'm going to go ahead and I have put this nice little dot here where we are located, which is actually North Bend real time. However, when you start to see me zoom in here, you actually start to see that spread out all over the place. We have 2,073 people outside the city limits that are utilizing the pool. So 2,073. Of those, obviously the majority are in Oregon, but when folks come and visit and they'll stay a couple months, they actually have pool passes. And so they're using it, but they actually live in another state to pay.
And so these are our registered users. These are people that have bought pool passes, pool memberships, swimming lessons, rentals, things like that, where we've collected contact information. This doesn't include just our pay-as-you-go cash customers for over the counter.
We also don't pick up like who's on the individual teams and things, I suspect, or do
We do
we?
not.
Okay, all right. This, the reason I show you the map is when you start to look on the coastal region, you realize that these are folks that are living elsewhere, they pay taxes elsewhere, but they are coming and using the facility. 62.2% of the folks in the state are Coos Bay zip code. That doesn't mean the city limits. We only went zip codes. Second by 17.3% that have a North Bend zip code, but are outside the city limits. And so you start to see some of that north of the city and elsewhere. Followed by Bandon, Coquille. Coquille, interesting enough, has a pool, but it's not open year round, and it's not closed. On to Lakeside, Myrtle Point, Brookings, Port Orford, Langlois, Reedsport, and then other, meaning I just sort of grouped because they were individual. The pool is born on the backs of the taxpayers in North Bend, but is actually serving the region. And so you now see visually the region that you've been serving, and it's not just a Coos County issue. You see that you actually have multiple counties there. Right.
Question, please. There's a smaller circle kind of off to the side and has a 1 something that's kind of obscured.
One of two, and that just kind of breaks down, it's breaking them into groups as
There are some times where there's multiple folks at a given address. There's also, we know the zip code was there, and it was zip code for us, but the address wasn't resolved. So we know that there are about 3 dozen that we were not able to map out.
So I've zoomed in a little bit and you can see how widespread our usage is and how there really isn't a street in North Bend, Coos Bay. And as I noticed, even my neighbors in Coquille, there are 5 houses on my street and 4 were in our database. So,
This actually will allow you to go down all the way to street level and find out who on your street actually uses our pool.
thank you, David, for putting that together. So one of the things that I was tasked with at that meeting was, or options we gave going forward, were creating resident, non-resident fee structures. That was something that had been in place with the pool before. It had been taken out of use for many years, and we reinstated so that we could reward those North Bend taxpayers that were paying their property taxes, and those property taxes support the general fund, which in turn supports the pool. So what we did was come up with a resident, non-resident fee structure. And those numbers were very slightly increased from, so I'll give an example. A child admission 0 to 5 was $2.25 when I was a kid. When I got here in 2016, it was $2.50. We're currently at, so their fee schedule just recently approved for a resident child 0 to 5, $3.60 and $4.12. So it's not a big gap. It's about 20% for that non-resident fee. It wasn't a lot. It wasn't something that we wanted to immediately exclude them from being able to use the pool, but it was enough to help kind of offset those costs that aren't being supported by the general fund. Looking at our entire budget and operating costs, this year's budget included some bigger ticket items in the actual operating budget, things that needed to be replaced, like lane lines that we've been restringing with cable from Oregon Pacific for years, and things that we started to put so much money into that it's just time to replace. We'd also, after that meeting, wanted to focus on recreation and getting more kids into the pool, becoming that another recreation activity. We had to get rid of some recreation swims in 2018 when we really pared down all of the budgets and had to cut things that really weren't making sense financially at that point. So we kind of cut back on some staffing levels and got rid of a couple of swims that weren't pulling their weight. But in the past couple years, we bought a new slide. We've been partnering with Reed Sport kind of to share some equipment and defray some of those costs so that we could still have those fun things to do, but we weren't footing the bill all ourselves. One of the other things that has really impacted us, especially being open 400 or 4,900 hours a year, that's a lot of staff time. And when minimum wage goes up, that's a huge hit to that staff, that operating cost, because we have to staff the pool. We have to lifeguard. There's state mandates on how many lifeguards you have to have per number of people and things like that. Because of the layout of our pool and the deck space, we should have at least 3 lifeguards on anytime there's anybody in the water. Some of our swims we're able to do that. Practices, absolutely, we'd have more lifeguards on. Lessons, we were a multi-use facility. We would have lessons and water aerobics and lap swim and practice all going at the same time because we have such a demand for our water. And that is one thing that has been daily, that there wasn't a dead time where there was nobody in the pool. We had made changes to utilize all of the hours that we had to be more open to the public, to get more people in the door and work around all those things that we've added. We've added teams, we've added practices. The teams have been popular, they grow in size. If this list and map included the teams, we'd had international dots on there. So right now,
Actually, it might be helpful to mention something you said to me earlier. So as we were looking at that utilization, all the utilization, changing up the finances, et cetera, I think at one point you said we'd gotten to where the gap was 60-40, where for every dollar it was costing us to operate the pool, we were actually at one point bringing in 60 cents. And so all of that utilization equates to dollars, but not enough because that's only M&O, your maintenance and operations. It did not cover where your gap occurred then is you have all this deferred maintenance. And although she'll speak about a lot of the maintenance that's occurred, you still have that laundry list of equipment that's got to be addressed. And so that was sort of kind of the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. Let's pretend it's not there. We know it's there, but we'll get to it.
There's not been a capital improvement fund for the pool, just in general for the last however many
Very,
years.
very minimal.
Okay,
in the past
Okay.
2 years, we've started to put money into the capital fund, and that was to support our goals of, our most recently adopted goals of working with Energy Trust to come up with a plan going forward, so we won't just throw money at things and babying it along, putting another coat of paint on it. We wanted to fix it and make it right so that we could lower our operating costs with fuel savings, energy savings, water savings, things like that. Staff savings, especially because with the older equipment, we spend a lot of staff time on maintenance. In fact, we could have checklists of things that they had to do every hour that had to be signed off on, closing tasks, on top of the general maintenance performed by myself and then with the Health and Works Department.
didn't the building just get a new roof here within the last several years, and how was that then?
We did in
Paid for.
2017. We got a new roof. The roof that was on the structure was original.
It was what?
It was original
Oh,
to
okay,
1956, 1957 in most spots.
right.
And that money actually came out of the building improvement fund, which had been used to purchase police cars in the past.
It had been,
That fund had been used to purchase police cars and other equipment improvements at City Hall, things like that. And that allowed us to do the roof without going into debt. And then we also got rebates from Energy Trust of Oregon on that.
The flip side is, although they did take that from that fund that applied, we did offer the police department that they could actually use that as a parking lot to park their patrol cars. They just have opted not to do that.
So getting up for this year, for the fiscal year 2021, our operating cost per hour would have broken down to about $100 an hour. for a 27,000 square foot building full of water. That's not bad. Going forward, there'd be a lot of things that we have to look at. We have more minimum wage increases coming. We have another potential large minimum wage increase that could happen. And those are things that we have to look at. All of our lifeguards are temporary staff through Cardinal, and so that includes their markup to cover things like workers' comp and payroll. Like that.
Okay, it will be helpful. So there's this initiative to get to a $15 minimum wage in Oregon. So our cost is plus. So for every $15 per hour minimum wage, our cost is roughly about $20. So each time it ticks up, that overhead of plus, the actual taxes, costs, et cetera, plus profit, runs about 25% over and above what we're paying, which is still a significant savings as if they were a regular employee.
So looking back over several years, on a few months ago, we talked about in 1994, when the city took over the pool, that there was a tax-based increase specifically for that year because it hadn't been budgeted, and the city realized that it was an important part of the community and put that to the voters through it. Unfortunately, that tax-based increase was just for that year. But in doing so, we learned that the pool budget was $394,000. Our budget for fiscal year 1920, our actual number was $336,987. So we're operating cheaper now than 1994. And
That was in last year's budget? Was
so my actual
3
numbers for fiscal year 2019, 2020. So we did shut down in March, but our budgeted amount was 384,000. So we still came in, we lost a good chunk of revenue because summer lessons are purchased between March and June 30th. So that's a huge bit of our revenue. But that expenditure, even when you spent money, knowing we were going to have the staff costs, we spent money on replacing piping for the hot water heater to take hot water to the front for showers, very important to our clientele. We rebalanced and reset the pump and redid the coupler on that. We worked on the filter system. We worked on the boiler. We performed all of our preventative maintenance stuff. So we didn't really have any time that, all that downtime. So we did a lot of stuff while people weren't able to be in the building. Replaced the toilet paper and paper towel dispensers. Luckily, we thought to go touchless with the paper towel dispensers, so they are.
That's since COVID, you mean?
That's since COVID. So
Okay.
we hit the ground running as soon as we came back to get stuff done and ready to open along with our plans and things. But going forward, if we want the pool to be sustainable, we need to cover that operating cost. So things like contracts that I brought to you before that were significantly lower than the actual cost to operate the pool, those things would have to change. And we wouldn't be able to stair step into it as much as that has to happen if we want the pool to continue. Looking forward, we talked about getting some numbers about bonding or a levy. So for a levy, and that's an operate, so a levy would cover operations. We'd need $138 a year per taxpayer. Works out to about $11.50 a month. And that would cover your operating costs, and any revenue that you brought in over the counter would then be, you could put towards capital. We have some fairly large capital needs. And we've done a lot in the past 7 years, but there are still a lot of things that are outstanding. We work with Energy Trust to come up with the top 3, and that's the pump, to be compliant with Model Aquatic Health Code and state codes. The filter, running the original filter from 1956, the last one of its kind. When I talked to a filtration guy that had called to talk to Public Works the other day, he went, "What? You have what?" And we have those are things that we hand sew our filter discs ourselves. We do all the preventative maintenance. We do all the maintenance. My first year here, we sandblasted and then put a 3-part marine coating on the inside to try and preserve it a little bit longer so we could come up with a game plan to take care of all of the things, because as you replace these things, there are other needs. You can't just replace the filter, well, you have to replace the piping and rerun how things work, because the filter room looks almost identical to what it did in 1956.
Okay, Kaylee, let's wrap it up about 30 seconds and I'll hand it over to the council for questions.
Okay. I think that's it. I've also got a list of things that we have done in the past few years. If anybody has any questions about that, or any questions about anything, I can help you out.
I think that was roughly, you said about $500,000 worth of capital improvements since what time frame?
Since 2013.
And Councilman
And that's
Slater
a
had asked about
conservative
that
number.
because he wanted to know, have we been actually doing things on the pool? And the answer is yes. Not every single thing has been deferred. It's the big ticket items that have been deferred.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you've done things since COVID. Yeah,
So $500,000 over the last 8 years.
At least, not the conservative number, that would be
Yeah.
cost of materials, not, a lot of these things happened staff wise. They're bigger things that have gone out to local companies mostly. We've been really lucky to be able to find quality workmanship.
well, hypothetical question, what would we have to put in our budget to hire a maintenance supervisor for the pool and do a decent amount of maintenance every year and turn the pool over? Can't somebody else run the pool cheaper than us? Is that a question?
They can, but you have to address the capital first.
Yeah, no, I understand.
So the answer is yes. I'm going to give you sort of a picture. So you see the size of our pool, and then you see the size of Mingus Pool in Coos Bay. Coos Bay has it outsourced with a nonprofit. The city still is covering staff repairs, and
Right.
they provide chemical utilities. Maybe it's just utilities, not chemical. Their coin, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is about 120,000 operational for that size. So and we
2 plus probably.
will probably be about 250 to 270. And so we've got to figure out how to address the capital to the point where they can operate it efficiently. Right now, they've got it as efficient as they can. I don't want to deceive you in any way. The pool could, if COVID was gone tomorrow, we could get that pool open in about a month, conservatively, and operate it. The question is, at what point are you going to get to the point where it's just going to, at some point, that equipment's going to breaking. You know, it hasn't been operational, hasn't been running.
Well, that was my point. You know, I was surprised to hear that their budgeted number is only 384. That was my point. If somebody else could run it and we had to throw, you know, 200,000 a year to it and improve it as we go, or, you know, take a loan. At one point you said something about taking a loan from wastewater. I'd hate to see Ralph's face right now, but take a loan from wastewater, get it up, and then that 200,000 we budget, some of that goes to pay that thing every year till it's gone. And hopefully we're progressing on and people are swimming. I'm just throwing things out there. If somebody wants to pipe off, they can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The only other anomaly I want to put in about Mingus Pool is they had a private benefactor that took care of the rehab of their pool. That's how, you know, and in fact, it's a gift that keeps on giving. So that's why they're not as concerned about that. You know, the city will tell you it's not their pool. So for us, it's a little sort of different situation. That's why I always emphasize we've got to figure out the infrastructure, or we have to find a nice benefactor to help us out.
So they had an endowment for their pool,
It
basically?
still does it. It took care of. I don't know all the specific details. I just know what I was told in the conversation. So Yes, back when they completely rehabbed, it was taken care of. And that's a gift that continues to provide maintenance costs
Okay,
for infrastructure. And then they operate with the nonprofit to cover the costs.
Right.
And then the city does the infusion for roughly about 120,000, both actual and in kind, but there's cost attached to it.
Kaylee, could you explain a levy? Because I don't quite have a clear picture of how that then would include people outside the city, and based on this map, would they be included or not?
So if we were to do something outside of North Bend city limits, that would be something like forming a parks district or a school district to get everybody under that.
It would be a new
umbrella.
district that would include, it would be like countywide or
That would depend on.
where would you?
Depend on how we wrote it.
You'd have to draw a boundary,
We have several people in the county
and they would have
that
to
would be
agree to
willing
be
to help.
taxed.
to look at things and, yeah.
Well,
So this is looking at, your numbers are looking specifically at,
This
North
was just North Bend, and then if you're not North Bend, then we already have inside outside, so the outside cost would go up exponentially. Because no one in the city would like to see, I mean, the numbers are just upside down. I
mhm.
mean, when you look at how many SEER folks are outside utilizing that resources. So, and I'm sure they thank you on a regular basis. I'm sure they come up to you on the street and say, hey, thank you for paying for my pool use.
Well, I mean, this is just like the airport. I mean, the city of North Bend ran the airport for 50 years. We funded it, everything else. Got into a point where we couldn't afford to do it, which is, I think, where we're at right now with the swimming pool. And we turned it over to the port, and the port took it with a caveat that they got X amount of dollars from the county. Then the port didn't want to do it anymore, so they were turning it over to the airport district, but the airport district wouldn't be formed until they got a countywide tax base, which is, I think, what this thing means. Because personally, I don't want to pay, what would you say, $139
$11 a month.
it'd be 138 a year, $11.50.
Right,
And that's on average split across.
right, but
What
that
your
doesn't
actual is
include,
gonna be on the valuation of your property.
that's
So
just for
That's
the
an average.
operation, correct? That's just for the 300 and whatever
That
thousand,
was
No,
to-
that's for everything.
with,
This
including
is
the,
to
including the
sustain it.
capital improvement.
Yeah, because based on the income that would be coming in, this would be supplementing, because you're not going free. It still is not going to be free,
Right, yeah.
but it's going to, that amount roughly generates about $500,000 a year. So it takes care of all of your infrastructure and then covers your gap. And it would have to be basically a Parks and Rec levy. So it takes care of your pool, your community center, and also your park. So it would supplement that area to plug that hole that you have right now.
So you're saying that the 1150 would support the parks and the community center and the pool?
Yeah, because on the way we've done the math.
That's pretty easy to swallow there for me. I mean, that's a lot easier to swallow than just the pool.
Because
By all means.
Yeah, and that still has you basically taking a loan from yourself to get the infrastructure paid off. And then our calculations show about, I think, 67,000 a year, then escalates on that to cover. And then so you have to get basically to increase the fees of coming in. But over the term, that would help with the levy for that gap, and that's about $500,000 gap.
So would that defer the monies from the general fund that's going towards the parks, or the pool and the
Are you-
community building for
So
5 years or however long the levy is?
precisely, yes.
So that sounds to me that would be a really good possibility to be able to help fund our public safety with the monies coming in the general fund for police and fire. And I don't know what that number is yet. I guess you could figure out what number that would be that's cost to operate the parks, the community building, and the pool. And figure out what dollar amount, if it's $11.50 or if it's $12 or
a month or whatever, that seems to be a pretty good, I don't know if it's a solution, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
So are you saying that gets away from her budget of 384?
So so her budget of 384, keep in mind, her budget also shows, income. So we recognize that the non-North Bend cost is going to have to differentially go up, okay? The larger package also then shows a more aggressive concerted effort on the rentals of the community center, making sure that we get the grants to take care of the building maintenance. So there's a lot of wheels to that, but that infusion that starts about $500,000 and as valuations go up, slowly increases, but starts to sustain you. We take care of the infrastructure and we estimate that that is a, that was the timer. That was a 5-year loan where you're paying yourself back over 5 years. So you recoup and you have to repay that. If something happens, you borrow from yourself. So that gives you, if you want to sit down with the banker and say, hey, I need a little bit more time, right? You're talking to yourself really, if you will. But that money has to get repaid to that enterprise fund. But it is a sort of unique way to do it. It also allows you then to outsource and still have it paid so that the money they're bringing in has to cover their actual cost. And so by 5 years, you've got to be to that breakpoint point where it's not a burden to the city.
So you're not talking about having the full money that you're pulling out of the general fund right now. You'd have to pay at least a portion or most of that back to the loan.
I'd have to pay roughly about, as I said, I think on that bottom sheet, it gives a number of like 60-some thousand under capital per
For
year.
capital, for fiscal year ending 2020 or 2022.
But you're looking at, for the money that you've got right now that you're pulling out of the general fund for those 3 items, what's that total number? Parks Department, community center, and the pool.
I can give you that in just a few.
Is that like $500,000 or?
It's more than that.
It's more than that.
I don't know. I'm just asking.
Yeah, ironically,
I can-
gosh, I just ran that number because you have police, fire, pool.
Right.
And then everything drops down below that. So, it's,
Well, I realize that, but I'm just saying.
and so you start with an infusion. If you want a levy that pays for it all, we'll therefore divesting yourself of all of your overhead. Because we still have, one full-time employee and that's, significant cost overhead.
Yeah, because at this point, you don't have any revenue to speak of coming from the community center or the park.
I mean, in the
Compared to
condition
the
of
cost
Boyce
of
right
operation.
now, we can't get Mingus and that group to take it over.
Right.
If we got it in shape, then that's a whole nother conversation.
Right, sure, I get it.
Okay,
So
you
it
guys-
sounds, go
so-
ahead.
you
Barbara.
guys came up with $130-some per house. Did you break it down to a millage rate?
69 cents. Per dollar.
Okay,
So that's the levy rate.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it sounds like a potential levy could be one of the most
If you want to keep the pool.